Engel, Country Manager at Knight Therapeutics, Brendon Levac, Head of Market Access at Bayer Healthcare, and Dr. Alysha Croker, Director of the Centre for Policy, Pediatrics, and International Collaboration at Health Canada. Okay. And I'll leave the panel to Thereni.
Yes? Okay, perfect. Before I start, I want to thank Kelly for joining us last minute, because I think it's really, really important when we have conversations like this to have patient groups, because you are the voice, and this is the why we're all here today. So thank you for last minute to join us. So I have the privilege, my name is Thereni Napper, I have the privilege of moderating this afternoon, and the conversation is about bottlenecks. And Canada, I guess, is having a reputation in terms of taking a lot of time to access innovative treatments. So I think from each of our different perspectives, we'll have different opinions. And this is really meant to be a conversation and a discussion, and hopefully you all will join us in this conversation as well. So before we get into it, I'd like to introduce everybody. Please, Kelly, start us off to introduce who you are and what.
Okay, well, thanks for the invitation to be here. Kelly Gorman, I'm a Senior Director at Public Policy and Government Affairs for Arthritis Society Canada. So myself and a colleague, we lead all the advocacy and public policy work across Canada for the Arthritis Society, and access to treatment is a big issue for our community.
Thank you. Brendon?
Brendon Levac, Head of Market Access and Government Affairs at Bayer. This is a topic, I love this topic. We've been talking about this for a long time. Last week we had some executives from Bayer come to visit, global leadership, come to visit Canada, learn about Canada, and the number one question that myself and the market access team kept getting asked repeatedly is, why does it take so long to get coverage in Canada? So it's a very timely discussion. Happy to be here.
I think everybody has that question. So Jody Engel, I'm with Knight Therapeutics. I'm the former GM for Canada. I've moved into a global role, but I think market access is something that globally we're all dealing with and struggling with, so very happy to be part of this panel.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Alysha Croker. I am the Director for the Centre of Policy, Pediatrics, and International Collaboration. We're within the Health Products and Food branch. So for those of you who aren't super familiar with all of the different pieces of Health Canada, it's got a pretty broad mandate, but the Health Products and Food branch is the health regulator. I'm a cell biologist by training, moved into the policy side. I joined the Government of Canada almost 12 years ago now, meandered through a couple of different departments, fell in love with Health Canada, and have been there for the last 5 years. A number of our, talk with my hands, I will not do that again. A number of the files that we work on in our center are related to market access, directly or peripherally, and so I'm really happy to be here as part of this panel.
Perfect. Thank you. So before we all get talking, I thought I'd do a questionnaire, do a little bit of market research. How many of you, hands raised, think there is less than 3 bottlenecks in the Canadian system in terms of access? This is
No
a tough
takers.
crowd. Yeah,
No takers.
No. More than 5 to 10? Oh, you got somebody back there. That's my friend. That's my phone a friend CDA. More than 10? I'll just leave it there. More than 10. We think that there's more than 10. So this is a great conversation to have, but we only have 30 minutes or 45 minutes. So we thought we would have this conversation in terms of understanding what does current state look like first, based on our different perspectives. So how about you start us off, Kelly? What does the current state of bottlenecks look like in Canada?
Well, the theme, right, is, time to market. And when we were having a conversation earlier, really it's about time to patient, right? So once it gets to approval, there's a huge process that, it goes through with the price negotiations and then getting listing on all the different formularies. And so that's a real challenge, across diseases, and especially with arthritis. We did a report card kind of on the state of arthritis across Canada that we released last year, and one of the indicators that we looked at was the availability of medications, and we called it availability because we didn't want to say access, because even getting on a provincial formulary does not mean that people are going to get access to that drug. And then the variability of coverage across Canada. It's something that everybody talks about, post-acute lottery in terms of healthcare and access to medications, but we wanted to kind of document that for arthritis so that we have the space, and this is a big thing that we are now working on, is how do we elevate that? And how do we look at what's happening in the different provinces, the provinces that are doing a little bit better, and encourage other provinces. But it's a big challenge, and it's also really time-consuming. You know, when you're a health charity, we don't have a lot of resources, and there's many different files that we're working on. And then another big thing is around timely diagnosis. You know, the presentation to start off today was around rare diseases, but I think it applies across the board, right? It's about timely access or coverage to medications. It's also reducing the time to diagnosis so that we can start people on the right medication. And then the health data piece is another big thing, because we need to have better understanding so that we can help people get on the right drugs, right, at the right time and the right person.
So it's just not about getting a drug on a formulary. Yeah. It's all about how do you get the person engaged in care, making sure they have the right diagnosis, and then ensuring that they have equality of access across the board, and it's just not winning a lottery based on a postal code.
Yeah, and then just the other thing too with that access piece, I say, often people have to fail multiple therapies before, and their doctor knows that they're probably going to fail, and the drug, so they don't start them on the right treatment right away. And, for certain diseases like inflammatory arthritis, right, that can have a real impact in terms of the joint damage that can then be permanent. So that's a really big challenge as well.
Criteria as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. Brendon?
So I'm going to think of this based on strictly on timing-wise, not scope of access, but the time to get coverage for patients. And talk about what's central, what's on the side, and sort of watch list. So to me, front and center is PCPA. The PCPA process, particularly the queue and waiting to negotiate. I know that can be very frustrating from a manufacturer side, from patient group side, from clinicians, so many people waiting for that. So to me, that's central. On either side, I'm going to go to the listing process. So once we have an agreement with PCPA, some jurisdictions list very quickly. We're going to call it Quebec. It's very predictable. It's very helpful. Other jurisdictions take longer. So not saying anything I don't think anyone doesn't know here. I will say on the earlier side, there was a responsibility for manufacturers as well. We have a real hand in this, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we file with Health Canada in a timely manner relative to other regulatory bodies worldwide, and also taking advantage of pre-NOC HTA submissions to start the process earlier. So we as a manufacturer, I think, have a part in this as well. Last comment I'm going to make, this came up earlier this morning, I think it was for the opening address, is on the private payer side. So I similarly have been a bit concerned, especially in recent years, seeing private access getting longer and longer, particularly for specialty and oncology drugs. Hopefully this won't persist and grow, but I think it's something we definitely need to watch out for. We'll spend most of the time, I think, talking about on public, but private is so important for early access.
Perfect. Thanks.
You literally took the words right out of my mouth. I have nothing else to say.
I was going to say, anything else, Jody? Manufacturer perspective?
No, actually, just to build on what you're saying, I think also one of the challenges is when you talk about, I'll go backwards with what you said in terms of the private market, I think that caught a lot of companies off guard. I think people weren't expecting, I know that back in the day, we won't say how many years ago, when I was in BD and we would license in products, it was a given that you would get the private market. It was like, okay, we're going to get private right away, we get approval, we get private, and then it's going to take X amount of time to get public. And that's not the case anymore. And I think that caught a lot of industry off guard. I think people weren't prepared for that. And I think the fact that there's often now, not only is the process with private taking longer, but also PLAs, I think there is a need, and I was on a panel last year on private payers, and one of the things that I said, and I think that's applicable everywhere, is the importance for communication. And I think that everybody is navigating this, new version of reality, whether it's PLAs on the private side that we never had before, or it's more drugs that are coming through, or less drugs that are coming through, or other pathways that we have at Health Canada, Project Orbis. Like there's new things that are happening now in the industry, and I think that we need to adapt, and I think we also need to really have that communication and that flexibility. So I've spoken with many different private payers and about improving that how do we get to market faster? What can we do? Can we submit faster? Can we find out that we need a PLA faster? Can we negotiate more openly? Can we be more creative? So I think that communication, whether it's on the private side or on the public side with PCPA, with the provinces, I think that's something that we need to really all embrace, because at the end of the day, we are all working towards the same goal, and that's to make products available. And I think you hit the nail on the head with availability to patients. And I think that communication is really at the center of all of that.
Good. So going last is awesome. So I think that the majority of the big issues here have been covered. Looking at it from a regulator perspective, I think finite resources are always an issue, whether they be within Health Canada or within industry as well. I think that's always going to be a bit of a challenge. Reimbursement, our very complex reimbursement system, and the shared healthcare being a shared jurisdiction between the federal and provincial and territorial levels, that also gets complicated. And I think from our perspective, we're always thinking about different ways that we can incentivize submissions coming to Health Canada earlier. So can we get the submissions at the same time as the FDA and the EMA, and how can we make that happen so that we can expedite access to those products for people in Canada? And then I also like that there was a bit of a plug for that and specific gap areas. So for example, pediatric medicine, we know that is a significant gap area where about 75 to 80% of the medicines that are prescribed to children in Canada are done off-label. We know in a lot of cases the data is available elsewhere because of regulatory requirements in other jurisdictions, but for whatever reason it doesn't end up coming to Canada. And so I think there are some gap areas there, PEDS being an example, where we would love to learn and understand as the regulator how we can incentivize more of that data coming to Canada.
So Kelly, based on an industry perspective and a government perspective, from a patient perspective, when you hear what the challenges are from their different perspectives, what are your thoughts?
Well, we hear this too, I think within the patient community too. We know that a lot of work is being done with CDA, AMC, and are having conversations with Health Canada, the Target Zero, so those are all, there's positive things. Sometimes it does seem like it's a lot of talk that we hear, and both, maybe sometimes from industry, always blaming government, and government, we're just figure it out, right? There should be a path forward and involve us. Right? I think the earlier you can involve different, the health charities and patient groups, they can provide really valuable insights. And, that is happening. I think it could happen even earlier, even, when you're looking at what drugs to bring to Canada or your clinical trials, and there is a lot of work about engaging the community earlier to understand what they want from a drug product, right? Which is just going to help down the line in terms of moving a product along. The PCPA, and for our community too, there's some that have sat there for a really long time, but we have heard, again, those conversations are starting to happen. So we would like to see the improvements in terms, and transparency as well. That would be really helpful for us to have an understanding of what is happening and where are exactly the bottlenecks happening. We don't want to be involved in the price negotiations. That is between, the government and industry. But it's really important to get these products to people, right? And we saw some personal stories today, and I think probably most people in the room have a personal story of someone that has benefited from medications.
Perfect. Thank you. So that's current state. So a lot of things going on and different perspectives and different challenges. So I guess the question is, what do you do with that? Understanding where we are today, where do we want to go? What does the ideal future state look like? And how do you think we're going to get there? So Alysha, you went last. So I'm going to let you go first this time.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So that is the question that we get to focus on a lot within Health Canada, especially in the policy space. So I think from our perspective, of course, again, as the regulator, regulatory modernization is something that we have been focusing on over the last little while. So through our agile licensing framework, which is to update the food and drug regulations, modernize those regulations, through work that we're doing currently on clinical trial modernization to make Canada more attractive attractive market to bring clinical trials to. Also, our Advanced Therapeutic Product, or ATP framework, which is designed to remove regulatory barriers for really new and innovative products that we think would challenge our current existing food and drug regs. So we'd be able to create a regulatory sandbox that would help us then allow access to those products while we figure out how to regulate them. And so I think that is really important to making Canada an attractive place to bring products to. I think sort of along those lines, international collaboration and global harmonization of regulatory requirements are also key to making Canada an attractive place to bring health products to. We do a lot of work in that space through groups like ICMRA or ICH, which are really, have really been instrumental, as I'm sure all of you know, in harmonizing key areas of medicines regulations, which has been amazing. That's also allowed, that sort of regulatory harmonization has also allowed initiatives like Project Orbis for oncology products, or our Access Consortium, which is, the world's first 5-way work-sharing initiative between Canada, the UK, Singapore, Switzerland, and Australia. That took a lot of work. It took a lot of, trust building over time. But now we're in a place where we have one submission for 5 jurisdictions to help expedite access to products in those 5 medium-sized markets. And these things are important, especially thinking in Canada, we have about 2.2% of the global market, and so it's a relatively small amount, and so we need to be able to do other things to sort of support that access. On the other side of things, so less the regulator part of Health Canada and more our strategic policy part of Health Canada, we heard actually already today about National Pharmacare, which is funding to support paying for drugs to ideally expedite decisions or reimbursement decisions within the provinces and territories, or our national strategy on drugs for rare diseases, which again is a substantial amount of funding going to the provinces and territories to help pay for and therefore hopefully expedite decisions around reimbursement. I think, just so that I don't talk too much, because I do have a lot of notes, I think collaboration, both nationally and internationally, are absolutely critical. And actually, it was great to have the presentation from NICE just now. There's a lot of value in collaborating internationally. Nationally, we do work together very, very closely with our HTA partners and where we can with the provinces and territories as well, so that we can design things like Target Zero, like aligned reviews, a number of other things. So, I've heard that the NOCC pathway, so Notice of Compliance with Conditions pathway, is sometimes a little bit tricky in that Health Canada's decisions on those don't always mean that the HTAs are going to also recommend decisions there. And so we've been working really closely in that space with the HTAs, and they've been working closely with the PCPA as well, so that we have a bit of a pathway for the NOCC submissions, where once we have our decision, then it could go to the CDA's time-limited recommendations, and then the PCPA has that pilot for their temporary access program to sort of facilitate those discussions. And so that's where collaboration is key, because we can work with industry to identify where those gaps are, where those hurdles are, and then work internally to address them. It doesn't always happen quickly, but we are, working on those things in the background.
So change is coming.
Yes.
Yeah. Jody?
So I think those are really exciting changes that are coming, and I think, you're touching on collaboration. I think we've seen Health Canada really moving to more of an open view of things, and I wouldn't say taking risks, but being more open-minded with regards to the data that's accepted and looking at that risk-benefit ratio, I think, a little bit differently. I'm not sure that we've really seen that follow through. When you look at CDA and PCPA, recognizing, these things don't happen overnight and it takes time. I think it's really encouraging to hear that focus on that collaboration, because I think fundamentally, if you have a disconnect between what data is going to get approved versus what data is going to get a positive recommendation, that really creates a difficult position for companies, because you might get the product approved, but if you're not going to get it covered, that becomes a problem. So I think that type of collaboration, and I think that also, I could see that flowing through as well to the private payers, to have those conversations, because again, we are aligned with what we are trying to achieve, and we're not always going to agree. But fundamentally, I think everybody in this room is the focus is on the patients. It's to ensure that you get those products to the patients. So the best way that we could ensure that, to improve that communication, like Project Orbis, an amazing initiative. So to be able to have that follow through to other areas with CDA, with PCPA, with the provinces, I think is going to be very important. And I think also, I think you touched upon it as well about, finger pointing, or that viewpoint of, we are going to have conflict. And I think one of the things, I was on the board of IMC for 3 years and having many discussions, with different types of payers. And I think there was also a perception of sort of like, well, it's your fault and it's your fault. At the end of the day, I think everybody could take some responsibility with regards to where these delays are happening. There's the obvious reasons and all of that, but there's also times where you can't agree with the negotiation. Maybe there's different frameworks we could look at, being creative, being open-minded. Sometimes there's supply issues that companies are going through, but at the end of the day, I think it's important to move away from that, it's this one's fault or that one's fault, but it's, at the end of the day, it's a responsibility that we are all sharing across companies, agencies, the government, everything. So I think if we approach it from that perspective,
So this
I do think that's
3
going to help.
minutes I have to kill between these. Why don't we do
I
the
think his
survey?
mic's not
Okay, so
muted.
everybody else
Put
can
up
hear
the
that?
survey.
Yeah.
Great.
I don't think his mic.
Check it. I was done anyway.
Oh, were you? Okay, perfect. Go for it, Brendon.
Okay, thanks. So a couple of thoughts. I'm going to go back to timing, and then I think about like scope of access. So I'd mentioned how at my company we had global leaders coming, asking, why does it take so long in Canada? And I noted that when I answered this, or anybody in the market access team answered this, the number one word we kept saying was process. Well, we have a process. There's a reimbursement process. There's a negotiation process. There's a listing process. Like we've structured this process within the company and within this country. This has been built up over time. So I kind of go back to, does this process work? What are the key elements for the process that we need to keep, and can we jettison something? I think partially what goes along with that too is going more parallel rather than sequential. So I think the best thing that's happened in a long time for time to access is pre-NOC HTA opportunities where we overlap regulatory and HTA. I would love to see PCPA do the same thing, such that PCPA leads identified in advance, they go to the expert committee meeting when the product is discussed. There's engagement early on. Seen some of that already from the one file, the PTAP file. I think to overlap these things, I think would help timing-wise considerably, so that it's not sort of a baton passing on back and forth. Also in parallel, along that same theme, I would love if when we get to the listing stage within jurisdictions, the product's made available in parallel with the product listing agreement being completed. Some jurisdictions do this. I think it's definitely appreciated, and I think this, again, could bring some very valuable, a couple of months, but that's meaningful, I think, for getting access for patients earlier. Last point, I wanted to pick up, Kelly, on what you were talking about system readiness. I think that's absolutely critical, because just having a treatment on a formulary alone doesn't necessarily enable a patient to be able to access it. Could be diagnostics, imaging, distribution, rural versus urban Canadian, different considerations that need to be thought about here. In that respect, I would love to be able to have much earlier discussions on how do we get ahead of that? What are those issues? 1 year, 2 years in advance with payers to let them know this is what we're working on. We do this through pipeline meetings, but I'm not sure it's really that effective and it's translating right now, but to definitely start to address some of those system readiness pieces as well, because otherwise, just the access doesn't work. You need to have the two of them together. So I'll pause there.
Perfect. Thank you. Kelly?
So some of this is outside my expertise area. So from a patient perspective, I think it's great to hear like some of the work that's being done to speed up. And it absolutely makes sense to try and do things in parallel, and we have heard that. And I know that the CDA AMC is doing a lot of work in terms of how they're using the patient input submission, which is great. We do a number of submissions. I think the one big thing is about collaboration, right? It was talked about earlier today. It was talked about here, and it's bringing different groups together, and that's something that we have done within even our own community around some of the issues. When we did our report card, we brought a broad group of people together, and sometimes it's people that don't agree, right? And if you can get in the same room and have honest conversations, then often you can. And sometimes you are going to disagree, and you have to be okay that you're going to disagree. Mm-hmm. But then we're going to try and see, okay, what can we agree on? And if we can't agree today, what will take us to get to that? And I think that's really, and collaboration is so important. And that's how we're going to get better care, and that's how we're going to get faster access. And we just did a day in Ottawa, an Arthritis Day on the Hill. It's the first time we've done that in a really long time. And one of the conversations that we were having, and it was around timely access to treatment. And one of the people we were meeting with that said, during COVID, like silos came down, and people were talking to each other, and we were able to move things along a lot faster. But now the silos are going back up. And so I don't know what the answer is, but really, it's come up because it's not just about the drug, right? It's about the impact to enable someone to go back to work. It's enabling them not to have to go to an ER visit. It's improving their quality of life. And so it impacts so many different parts of society that these different ministries, when you're talking from a payer perspective, really should be part of that conversation too. And to what you were talking about, why not also have conversations with the patient groups, so they can help. If it's going to be a product, we do not advocate for specific products. We advocate for access to medications to treat, but have that conversation of why these treatments are important. Why do we need to keep having new options? Because people will fail on some of these treatments, and these can lead to breakthrough medication. So I just think collaboration and engagement with different groups is a really important thing going forward.
Perfect. There's been a lot of discussions and different viewpoints in terms of where people are at. And I think one of the things that I would like to throw back at the panel as a random question that you're not prepared for is how would you do what you want to do? Like, how would you, you're being the head of Bayer Market Access, you want to, what's your role and what do you see as possible?
So I think it is walking the talk. So I talked about responsibility for manufacturers, so we need to live up to this. It's connecting with all stakeholders early on, patient groups, clinicians, to help facilitate these things happening. I think it's about transparency as well. Mm-hmm. So hopefully this isn't getting off into a tangent, but this is an idea I'm going to pitch. It's something I've put into so many different consultation documents, because I think this could really help. I would love to see if our HTA expert committee meetings are more like FDA advisory committee meetings, meaning they're open, transparent, anyone can register to attend, anyone can make a presentation to the executive committee, be it a patient, a clinician, the manufacturer. I truly believe that having that forum and it's open, scientific dialogue, perspectives of what a treatment means, particularly from a patient perspective, where the value is. I honestly believe that I think that those kinds of discussions and openness on the part of industry to have those discussions as well would help. I think it would help us with the quality of access we end up getting. And if in the end the access is different. Let's say it's more limited than what stakeholder input, let's say, had for HTA. I personally think that helps with understanding, at least acceptance of it, because if you may not agree with something, but if you were part of it and you heard the discussion that they got there, you might disagree with the outcome, but at least there's an understanding on why it happened. So apologies for the tangent, but that's something I think, and to me it comes down to timeliness and transparency for industry. That's what we should be doing as well.
So Alysha, what do you think based on that thought from a government perspective? This is your opinion. You're not held accountable.
It's not being recorded.
Yeah, we're not going to hold you accountable. Jeez, it's a panel. It's a conversation.
So, I mean, it's a great question. I think alignment is something that would be extremely beneficial on the government side, from federal and provincial and territorial, if there was some way to sort of align our priorities. Like if I go back to the pediatrics example, sorry, I'm going to throw that out there a couple of times just to plug our pediatric drug action plan. We launched a consultation. Check out our website. So, for example, in the development of our national priority list, so this was us working with clinicians and pharmacists all across the country to try to identify what specifically the gaps were in Canada for the pediatric population, because we obviously have heard for decades that we do not have medicines that kids need in Canada. And so that was an extremely powerful project, and now it is out for consultation. What would be ideal is if those priorities for Health Canada could transfer, or we could all agree, it can't be a top-down approach, obviously, but if we could all sort of get together, all of the, Health Canada, HTAs, PTs, all get together and agree on priorities, for example, I think that might expedite decisions around reimbursement and help expedite access to products, especially in urgent areas. Again, my own personal opinion, that it's not on behalf of Health Canada, but that would be, I think, something that could be very beneficial.
Perfect. Thank you. So is there any questions? I'm not timekeeping really well right now because we only got 12 minutes, but we're supposed to have 15 minutes. So is there any questions from the audience to this wonderful panel that you'd like to bring up? Oh, got one. Oh. My friend from CDA, I love how you're participating. Can somebody get her a mic? Yes, perfect, thank you.
Okay, so a couple of thoughts, and there will be a question in there somewhere. I completely hear, Alysha, your comment about alignment and common priorities. I think we couldn't agree more, except that part of the challenge, and it was mentioned by, and I'm so sorry I forgot your name, the gentleman from NICE, that HTA is very local, whereas regulatory tends not to be. And the key difference is the reason why regulators can more easily collaborate and share is because their question is efficacy and safety in and of itself. Whereas the question for an HTA is, what is the value of that health technology relative to things that you are currently using in your environment? And so that puts it squarely local. And so that's always been the challenge as to why HTA has challenges collaborating with each other because of that localized context. But it's also the question that the payers have, which is different than what the regulatory question is. So one of the thoughts, Brendon, you were talking about what is the accountability of industry in solving those pieces. Well, part of it is if more evidence was designed to meet HTA needs, then it would not only solve the regulatory aspect, but would also address the HTA and payer aspect of that continuum.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that?
Yes.
So when you say design evidence that would fit HTA, that will fulfill the requirements for regulatory, so you're looking at in terms of the design of the clinical trial fundamentally. So if there's a lot of comparators within the market, you would want,
Even one active comparator.
or one active comparator, you would want to show the benefit from a non-inferiority, or it will not do. You want something with a design of a superiority trial.
I'm not going to get into the superiority, non-inferiority question, but active comparators are important because for very few treatments, is the option no treatment? You know, because even in a placebo trial, you could have the supportive care arm, etc. But what we do need some information about active comparators. The best shot at doing that is within a clinical trial, because then otherwise you are looking at indirect comparisons or real-world comparisons and so on, and all of those have inherent uncertainties. So that's a different situation. Like that's what puts us at odds, for example, with the regulator, because the regulator can accept a novel or surrogate endpoint when it's clinically plausible. So if we then take the regulator decision, and I always say to our staff, we're not relitigating that. Let's accept that their efficacy was demonstrated. But then how do you line that up when older trials didn't use that novel or surrogate endpoint? Because then now you're guessing, right, at what that comparative value is.
Right. Any thoughts on that? Brendon, Jody?
I think that you're bringing up a very good point. I think that's a challenge, and especially if you're dealing with different jurisdictions where, the data that we take for Canada is the data that was done in the US or that was done in Europe. And if that's not required, it's going to be very difficult to design a trial and say, hey, by the way, can you just add in an active, no big deal, just add in an active comparator and no one else needs it, just Canada, and we're 2% of the market. Being in your shoes, I absolutely appreciate that, and doing the assessment and saying, well, okay, it might be safe and it might be efficacious, but how does it compare? And how do you put a dollar value? And how do you do all of that? I think one of the challenges is that the data isn't just for Canada. So the design, oftentimes is outside the hands of the Canadian team. And I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I completely agree, Jody. I was having the same thoughts. Far, definitely point well taken, though, and I think it's something as well. Sitting here in Canada, I love it when Canadian input on clinical trial design is asked. It's more, it's not all the time, and sometimes things will come and we're like, ooh, this isn't what we would have liked with someone from market access consultant on it. That's our issue to work out, but I think it's a fair point. I would also say from a manufacturer's perspective, we know that often when we look at the data and there is uncertainty here, there's a gap here. It's where I'm also super interested in outcomes-based agreements. Can we get there? Outcomes-based agreements as part of the HTA process as well, or promise of follow-on data. Maybe it's real-world evidence. So a way for a manufacturer to say, we know that this is not an ideal package. We did what we could, but here's what we propose to address that within the Canadian context. I think both sides could work together to help solve this.
And I think that you're highlighting, and it's something that I mentioned before, that gap that gets even bigger if you have, regulators who are approving data with novel endpoints or novel design, but then that can't get through on the reimbursement side. That's a disconnect. And I think that's a problem that I think we're all facing. And I don't think that there's an easy solution there, but I think that identifying it and trying to work through, okay, so what can we do? How can we? I think outcome-based agreements are a really good way. I think, sharing the risk, all of those things. But I think that's a divergence that we're seeing that I think makes it even more challenging.
Agreed.
Any other questions in the room? Yes? Oh, we got one. Can somebody give him the mic right there?
Thanks. Sam Stankovic, Insight Biosciences Canada. Great panel. Thank you for for sharing your thoughts. My question to the audience, or to the panel, for a reflection for the audience, is why does it have to be binding? Every step along the way, people are saying it's non-binding, but really the ultimate authority is at the provincial drug plan levels. So my thoughts, your thoughts on why does it have to be binding at every step along the way?
Do you want to take it? Do you want to? So you're asking why does it need to be binding? I mean, in a way, it's not binding, right? Like, so I think, are you saying that you want it to be binding? You don't want it to be binding?
No, everyone's on public record. Every step along the way is non-binding.
Yes.
CDA recommendation is non-binding.
Yes.
ECPA
Yes.
negotiation
Yes.
is non-binding. PLAs after negotiation you don't have to do a PLA. So, but why is it that everything is binding?
Are you,
So let me play back your question. So, so what you're asking is, you get a recommendation or you get a Health Canada approval, it's binding, right? That's the only
Yes.
thing that's binding. That's from
Yes.
your perspective. Okay. So HTA is a recommendation.
Everything's a recommendation until you sign your PLA.
Everything's a recommendation until you sign a PLA. So nothing, everything is uncertain in the market, right?
I think that's challenging. You negotiate an LOI. I mean, I remember the first time I realized the LOI wasn't binding. I'm like, what do you mean? What? How's that not binding? So I think it creates a lot of uncertainty because you get alignment on your price, but then it could be second line to 7 other drugs or this or that, and you don't know the criteria. That's a big question because that criteria and what you end up signing at the end of the day is going to have a major impact on what your market's going to be. So you may have put a price in your model, but you're not necessarily having every scenario of what that criteria could be. I think the fact that it's not binding until the end, I mean, you could look at it different ways. You could say, well, if it's not binding, then it leaves you flexibility to negotiate. But I think there's pros and cons to both, but I think it does become difficult because there's a lot that you don't know. And I think that it creates difficulty also because then you're going down to the provincial level. Like you have the alignment on price with the LOI, but then you have to go to all the provinces to negotiate that criteria. And that could have a material effect on the business case.
Yeah, and I think it's based on what you're saying too, and just adding to this, it's the planning process to understand what you're walking into too, to understand there will be delays, and it goes back to what was said from CDA in terms of, what's the evidence, what do you have, what's the potential, and what is possible, knowing the external environment and what it is, right? There's only so much, I hear all the time from my government stakeholders, there's only so much money to spend, and where do we spend it in the right places to the people who most need it. So it's the constraints in the system and how do you plan appropriately. That's what I would say. That being said, 1 minute and 53 seconds left. Any other questions? I would like to thank this panel, and especially you, Kelly, because I think you are a very important person in this conversation, because I think everybody that sits in this room, you're the why. We show up because we don't want to leave somebody behind. So thank you so much for joining us last minute, because you brought a lot of value. So it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you so much for the afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.